Hey guys, so I'm going to show you how to get correct exposure every time. So I'll be using my main camera, the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K as an example. Let's go. So the three most important settings you should be thinking about are aperture, shutter speed, ISO. Shutter speed is basically how fast light is let into the sensor. The higher the shutter speed, the less light. This also affects motion blur. The faster the shutter, the less motion blur. So in video, there's a fixed rule that shutter speed should always be double your frame rate to create that natural motion blur. So for example, 24 FPS should be 1 over 50th. 30 FPS should be 1 over 60th. 60 FPS should be 1 over 20th, and so on and so on. So if your camera has shutter angle, like my Blackmagic does, this makes it easy because you can just set it to 180 degrees and you won't have to change it when you change frame rates. So next is ISO. Think of ISO as brightness. The higher the ISO, the brighter the image. The thing is that the higher the ISO, the more ugly grain you get.
Ugly motherfucker.
You usually want your ISO at the lowest you can, or your native ISO, which you can probably find online. Usually I'm at 400 and I never go over 1600, but some cameras have very good low light capability. I would say experiment and find out how high you can go with your camera. Aperture is basically how much light is let into the sensor. The higher the aperture, the less light. It goes from 1.4, 1.8, 2.0, 2.8, and so on to 22. Some lenses have an aperture ring to control the aperture, and others are electronic and can be controlled directly from the camera menu. This is probably the most important step of them all, because aperture not only controls the exposure, but also affects the depth of field. Depth of field is basically the size of your focal plane. The lower the aperture, the more light and more shallow the focal plane is. Here's what I mean. Shallow focus is a small focal plane, and deep focus is a wider focal plane. Shallow focus looks more cinematic, right?
Oh, yeah.
See, the only thing is that it lets in a lot of light. So if you want shallow focus, here's how to combat that. ND filters. They're basically like sunglasses for your camera. They can come in a collection or a variable. I have the variable. I would say reserve this for last and make sure your settings are where you want it, and then add in the ND filter that best exposes your image. So here's what I do to get it right every time. Some cameras have presets where you can have these settings ready with the press of a button. But if your camera does not have this, then you can just use a label maker to place labels on your camera to remind you of your settings. Thanks for much for watching, guys. Like this video if you got any value, and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this.